Hello and welcome to this episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And in this episode, we are looking at a special subject, and that is about special forces that India's armed forces have put together since independence, but more recently in the past, that could be in many assessments regarded as strategic game changers. They have a strategic role. They also have an immediate role across our troubled frontiers, and they are highly trained, they are well equipped, superbly fit, and often somebody might regard them as the best of the best. But the roles they are employed in go beyond the ordinary. They could be used in interstate operations, which is across India's borders and India's immediate neighborhood, and their footprint continues to expand as India's geostrategic ambitions also expand. And to understand what our special forces are about, what kind of role they play, we have two informed experts as usual who will explain to us what now dominates the thinking in South Block about the use of special forces, how they have come to be, what will be their future operational roles. We have with us Vice Admiral Sinha, who spent an extended part of his senior officer's career in the Headquarters Integrated Service Command, which now was the part of the setup that the CDS's office was overseeing. And some of the work that he was involved in looked at proposals and papers which would involve the use of special forces beyond just the conflict scenario, maybe to convey force-changing messages, as India has done in the recent past, both in Myanmar and after the Uri raid in Pakistan across the LOC. And we also have with us General Dhruv Katoch, who is a well-known TV face. General Katoch is an infantry officer and has commanded a division with distinction. He is now academic and an institutional player who is with the India Foundation as a director, but is also the editor of Salute, a well-read magazine, as also having earlier been the head of India's Center for Land Warfare Studies. And General Katoch, among other things, has examined how the concept of special forces has grown from time to time in the Indian Armed Forces, from the time they were employed in the 1971 war, both in the eastern and western sector, with the Tangail para-drop of 2 paras, and in the western sector, the 10-para special forces raid on Chachro in Pakistan, and also the use of 9-para for the Mandol raids across the LOC that was then called the CFL. So welcome on the show, sir.
Thank you.
Admiral Sinha, sir, give us the big picture. Give us the concept that you, among others, had fathered, which is now being considered as the template for the Special Operations Division or the Special Operations Force. And we are clearly moving away from what was our approach in the earlier wars, including 1971, where special operations were basically limited to the para brigade and the parachute battalions. We have now many, many more battalions, including of Rashtriya Rifle, including of the Garud of the Air Force, and of course your own baby, the Marcos, which you had overseen as Western Naval Command CNC.
Well, thank you, Maroof, for getting me on your program. It's a little bit tough question because a lot of their operations are, as you said, they're very special. But yet I will see as to how much our viewers can gain out of this. The first thing was that we realized that the overt war was generally becoming too obvious to the adversary, and the movements were quite well known, and often they would get ambushed or they would get sort of challenged. So was it with the adversary as well. So there was a very serious thinking that we should, we should have a joint service kind of special forces who can operate in situations like, fighting over land or maybe doing some air raids or maybe even underwater. Each service had its own special forces, as you just mentioned. So we thought that it will be nice to join them together and have a credible force where the commander has the option of landing them. There should be mixture of all these three, so that wherever you land them, you are not waiting for another support group to come and join you. So that was the basic idea. And we did go about making a very small sort of team. Initially, the army alone was having its special forces, but slowly the two services came around. My own service also came around that I think we should join this, the entire team. Initially, we thought that, we may be able to raise a special forces command, but the army headquarters was right, and they said that, let's keep it small initially and let's see how they gel. Army special forces, you are aware fully, but what they wanted was, we have on the borders in many places, there are water obstacles which have been created by the adversary, both sides, whether you talk about Pangong So or you talk about the ditch cum buns which you have on the western border. And they always found it not difficult but challenging to make bridges and get the engineers into the show, and that would expose our troops for very long
and
time.
Under fire.
And under fire all the time, because maybe you're across the border. So they thought that, it's good to have these underwater experts. The Marine Commandos, as you mentioned, the last one that you mentioned, the Marine Commandos are primarily they are divers. They're very deep sea divers. So underwater operations, offensive operation, which is always, obviously it is covert because you can't see them what they're doing. But there are operations where they show up occasionally, and that is also meant for a particular purpose. And they can be paradropped, and they can also fight your land battle just like the Marines. In fact, the initial lot has been trained by the SEAL. And later on, we started having a bilateral exercise with the American SEALs at a place called Ganpati Phule in the west coast, which is still an ongoing exercise, so that we don't lose touch with the art of these SEAL operation. So that is where we are at the moment. And Garud has also joined this. Initially, Garud was raised actually for the protection of the airfields, but obviously they have graduated to more difficult tasks. Now, at least the Marcos are part and parcel of all your frontline formations on both the borders.
I also know they operate in J&K. More of that when we come after General Katoch gives us the big picture about land operations. Sir, you have obviously studied and written about our operations in Bangladesh. And of course, you closely follow developments in land warfare, particularly as an extension of your earlier role as head of clause. Give us some idea about what all went into planning for the use of the paratroopers for the Tangail paradrop, how they change the entire context of the conflict and even altered the objectives set out by Delhi. Because once that happened, and then there was a view that Dhaka is only 70 kilometers away, so let's go for it. So that was one. Then the use of the jeep-mounted 10 paras in the Chachro raid, and of course the famous Mandol raid by 9 paras, which we often don't hear about. Finally, of course, Op Cactus in the Maldives, where overnight paratroopers and their assets were moved by the Air Force into Maldives and showed India's ability to react swiftly. Your views, sir.
Thank you, Maroof. You see, the paratroopers have always played a role in each war which India has fought, starting from 1947.
Yes.
You see, they took part in Shelating, Poonch, Jhangar. They operated there. But that role, to a very large extent, was really restricted to what the rest of the infantry was doing. When we moved to 65, we had the MAIG force which was formed, which later was converted to a special force, which really carried out special force operations, and it was very successful. But the use of special forces in the strategic sense started really in 1971. And there were two specific operations, First, let me talk about the Tangail paradrop. Now here, the paradrop took place from two airfields from Calcutta, and they were dropped at Tangail. It was a daylight drop, and those visuals have been shown extensively on television channels. Now, what really this did was, it was a psychological moment really, which destabilized the Pakistani senior leadership. A battalion was dropped, two para SF, and as far as the Pakistanis were concerned, they thought a complete brigade has been dropped.
I believe
that
so.
was the psychological impact. And of course, the link-up took place next day, and from there, the force moved very close to Dhaka before the surrender. Then we talk of Chachro. That was the first time such a deep penetration had been carried out by vehicular-mounted troops of 10 para SF.
Right.
Now, this is the time when people realized that the special forces can be used for different sort of occasions. Now, when the coup took place in Maldives, I think it was in 1989. When this coup took place, it was the para SF, the 6th para SF, which was airlifted under Brigadier Bulsara.
Yes.
It was perhaps, I think, there's a lot of talk about the raid which took place at Entebbe by the Israelis. But I think this operation really hasn't got the credit which is due. It was carried out under the most adverse circumstances, right, without proper intelligence, and it went through like clockwork.
And the aircraft were expected to land on the short air runway of Maldives without landing lights.
Here, the role of both the Indian Air Force and the paras was unbeatable. And I think at some point of time, perhaps a film should be made to showcase the valor which took place by these men. The para SF, they've also operated in Sri Lanka, they've operated in Kargil, and recently now, in 2019, the Special Operations Division has been formed, commanded by a Major General. And I think this is very important because when we are looking at future conflict, we are not going to use any of these special forces in routine operations, right? If war is not going to be fought conventionally, then how is it going to be fought, and how the paras, the special forces will be deployed will really come into play. And the Special Operations Division has got personnel from the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. And I think the planning of those operations, which will come under the CDS, they're already under the CDS, under the Headquarter Integrated Defense Staff. That is going to be a very, very major game changer, because India, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, is not just looking as to what is happening internally. We are looking at the entire Indo-Pacific region. And the area of employment of these special forces now could be anywhere in our area of interest.
Very, very, very well put, sir. And Admiral, sir, I want to understand a bit more from you, since you worked on many of the proposals related to these special forces formations. Where do you see, because, I've got figures here, there are multiple units of the parachute regiment now have become part of special operations outfit, including they have with them some Rashtriya Raksha battalions, Rashtriya Raksha RR battalions, Rashtriya Raksha rifles, and they also have with them units of the Territorial Army and, of course, the Air Force and Navy elements. Now, classically, a person may turn around and say that, oh, okay, even if we look at the possibility of theatre commands and we'll have 4, maybe 5 theatre commands, so we'll give a combination of these to each theatre command, which will be a brigade level force, may have 2 or 3 army battalions, 1 Marcos outfit, 1 Garud outfit, or we just keep them to be employed as and when the need arises, and they all sit under a pool somewhere, and you just a phone call away. So what is the thinking?
The broad thinking at that time when the planning was being done was to see that it is in a central pool, and we should not leave it to the local commanders to use it at will. There are 2 reasons, not that they can't use it. It is just that one would not know as to who else is using, and it might just expose the tactics which the special forces apply. And therefore, those requirements were supposed to be projected by the field commander to higher formation, and in return, this would go. So hopefully, hopefully it should stay that way, because I still feel that our forces are not so big. The holding is not as big as, having a sort of one corps or some.
No, but a special forces division is a hell of a lot compared to probably anybody else in a developing world can hope to have.
True, quite true, quite true. But you see, if you see the disbursement of our forces, if you break them into small pieces of, let us say, the level of brigade or the level of maybe a platoon, then you will find that you will, come down to very small targets to be taken care by the special forces. That should not be intention. The special forces application must change the nature of war, the course of war. It must be very decisive. Particularly, as you mentioned that, as General Katoch also mentioned, Indo-Pacific, there are a lot of out-of-area contingencies, like you talked about Maldives, where your country will be called upon, to help them out, to weed out maybe the terrorists, to weed out somebody who's wanting to take over their country. So in those cases, rather than using the infantry or artillery in the real sense, in the conventional sense, you would rather have the special forces who can take on all three kinds of objectives. So that was the whole idea, and I think, to my mind, that should how it should be operating.
Also, from what I understand is that they are always prepared, quick to react. So they are like a division worth of QRT waiting to be deployed.
Absolutely.
Unlike, as General Katoch has commanded an infantry division, and he would know that a division has its operational roles and doctrines worked out, which they practice, rehearse. And even from there, to change them from a kind of a defensive role on the land frontiers to probably part of a strike formation would take a lot of reorientation. Yeah. That was one of our limitations in Sri Lanka, because we put the wrong troops at the wrong place without the level of coordination and training that is required before you make them effective in battles. And I will ask you, sir, the operations that were carried out in Myanmar after the ambush, unfortunately, the same unit that was covered with glory then has more recently come under flak for the mishap in Nagaland. But anyway, that doesn't undo the capabilities of the unit and their Josh and fighting spirit. Yet again, the operations after the Uri attack were, to my mind, perhaps the most spectacular operations by special forces after World War II, where close to at least 3, if not 4 teams went across into Pakistan, some say 5, and deep inside across the LOC, which is probably the world's most heavily guarded and heavily mined frontier. Now, to achieve that on foot, to keep the surprise element, required even better level of training and orientation, with no disrespect to those who get airdropped. The foot soldier, poor chap, has to still measure victory by the steps on the grounds.
Oh, yes, Maroof. Just to give you an idea of the strength of the special forces, there are 9 of these special forces battalions.
Right.
With the paratroopers. 5 are airborne. That makes 14. 2 are the TA battalions and 1 is the Rashtriya Rifles battalion, making a total of 17. Now, some part of this is with the Special Operations Division. Some part of it is in the northeast. Some is operating in Kashmir. And that is the current distribution. Now, when we talk about these 2 specific operations, we must remember one thing. What happens if something goes wrong? People really haven't understood the political implications of an operation like this going wrong. It can go south. But the brilliance of both these operations were that when they went into Myanmar, they executed the task and they exfiltrated, and it was a 100% success. When we are talking about what happened in Pakistan, on that specific raid, I remember a distinct statement made by the Pakistani politicians and journalists. And the politicians specifically said, "We are not Myanmar. You enter into our territory and we will see what happens." And then we had to show them they are Myanmar. You see, 5 of these special groups, they went across, they went deep inside, they carried out the operation, and they came back 100% safe. I know for a fact because I have carried out these operations at a different level. I've operated there also myself. These are very high risk operations, especially for the commanders who are behind. That means for the commander who has launched the operation was based in India, for the political authority, this was a very high risk operation and it was carried out successfully. It requires superb training. You see, and superb training, superb coordination. Every man amongst that team is a team and they will not leave anybody behind. We had injuries and they brought them in.
Yes, I'm completely with you, sir. In fact, internationally, especially the British Special Forces, they follow a dictum that whether it's a great success or sometimes operations go wrong, they rarely ever talk about it. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that Special Forces operations don't get the highest gallantry award, though I personally believe that the officer who led the raid after the Uri attacks deserved more than what he got. You know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Admiral sir, another aspect is the use of special forces in coordination with other ministries for internal disturbances. Look at the case of the use of NSG in post-Operation Blue Star of Black Thunder, use of Marcos and NSG in 26/11 attacks on Mumbai, and also the use of special forces, sometimes not in well-publicized operations, but certainly it kind of reinforces the control that Delhi can exercise over the game terrorists play. Your views?
Before I get to your question per se, you know, the Marcos, Marine Commando's predecessor was IMSF. It was called the Indian Marine Security Special Force. They were the predecessor. And we first used them in the Sri Lankan waters. You talked about the paradropping in the university in Jaffna, and a lot of our troops got sort of shot, and it could not be, very well positioned as to where does that fire come from. So the government decided to launch the IMSF into action. And first time that we sent the IMSF was in the Jaffna Lagoon.
I know an officer got an MVC there.
And they sailed and they scuttled the boats from where this fire was coming, left, right and center. And subsequently it led to our very successful paradropping. So this is another coordination between the Home Ministry, coordination with the External Affairs, coordination with the Ministry of Defence and 3 services.
Which can only be achieved in Delhi.
Absolutely, absolutely. Only, and that is the one reason why I mentioned that special forces must be in a pool rather than distributing it. Coming back to the question that you asked, you know, the special forces, as we just discussed that, they are very special, and many times the intentions will not be not be known. It will not be publicized. But suffice to say that the coordination amongst the ministries is 100%. One of the examples you gave was 26/11. But my own personal belief is that a bit of urban warfare needs to be given to every commando force, irrespective of the color of
Very
uniform.
good point, sir. General Katoch, sir, last quick question, request a short answer. The NSG has a fair amount of army personnel in it, but it's still controlled by non-army headquarters, non-MOD elements. Your views on that, sir?
You see, now that we have got the Special Operations Division coming in, I think the role of the NSG needs to be changed. It is my view that because these are special forces, the ones which are operating in the NSG, there are 2 components really. One is the police component, one is the military component.
Yes.
I think this military component now, it should be divorced from what the rest of the force is. So the NSG can continue giving out security guards to the Prime Minister, etc., etc. But the other one, which is the counter-terrorism force, it can be used for hijacking, anti-hijacking or stuff like that. Now, that must come under the Special Operations Division. And there's one more point about the Special Operations Division, which I think needs to be added. Very quickly, I'll say, you see, it's a question of intelligence. Now, I think they must be very closely associated with the intelligence agencies, especially with the satellite imagery. because terrain intelligence, the geospatial intelligence, is going to be vital in any of the operations which they conduct, and they should be prepared for all contingencies.
Clearly, sir, they have to operate at the highest level with raw NTRO and with direction from the NSA's office. But that's a very good point. Well taken. Thank you very much for your views. And thanks for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.